All right. Representative Fisher, welcome to the Housing Committee. I believe the intent is to lay this bill over.
Yes, it is, Chair Kozlowski.
correct?
Thank you for the opportunity. I also have a amendment.
Yes. Representative Fisher, would you briefly describe your amendment?
Sure. What my amendment does is this is based on input from meetings I've had with some of the providers out there. And what we're doing is trying to address the amendment to make sure that people understand this would be for like capital improvements that are happening to a property and over the life of it. So we're trying to get some better descriptions in it. This is still a bill that's a work in process, so I do appreciate the opportunity to come through with what we've got now. And I'm looking forward to input as we are dealing with the issue. So very quickly, what we're saying is that as long as the renovation has been made, that for the life of that renovation, even if owners change, you cannot evict the person without cause. And that's what the amendment does.
All right. Thank you, Chair Fisher. And my apologies, I have to remember to move the bill as well as to move the A1 amendment to bring it for the committee.
Thank you, Chair.
Members, any discussion to the amendment? All right. Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. All opposed? The motion prevails and the amendment is adopted. Rep. Fisher, to your bill as amended.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Committee. This is a bill that comes before you today based on experience some folks in my district are having. Over time, we have the people that I represent had been renting in the district. They do rely on disability waivers to help assist them in their living situation. They had worked with their landlord, and over about a 5-year process, they had made well over $80,000 of improvements and investments into a property that was worth about $400,000. They were in one unit of a fourplex. And what these improvements did was allow my constituents to be able to do more and more of their own duties around the house and not need as much government assistance and personal care attendance. So this was a way to make those improvements. It became an issue, and I did not realize this was a problem until the landlord, the original landlord, sold the property. When they sold the property, the new landlord came in and said, well, I'm going to evict you out, even though there had been $80,000 of improvements. And for my constituents to be able to go elsewhere to another property, they'd have to spend another 5 to 6 years being able to do the same kind of improvements to make sure they could live there, and then still be in a situation that if the landlord changed, the new landlord could then force them out after the government has made these improvements. So one of the things that it kind of bothered me a little bit is that typically when government makes improvements into properties, whether they're using TIF dollars, when they're working with local government units and building facilities, apartment units, using dollars from Minnesota Housing Finance, it's not unusual when you've got large government investments going in that there's conditions put in that if the owners change, that you're able to make sure that if you're going to, say, guarantee an investment is made so that you're going to have housing, rental units for, say, veterans who are unsheltered, and for them to live there, then they say for 20 to 25 years, you're going to be making sure that you're going to have this many units there, even if the ownership changes. And that's what was driving how I wrote this bill and put this bill together, is that when the government is making significant dollar investments on behalf of the constituents, the people who are using it there, which also at the same time will help save other government dollars on a regular basis, ongoing basis for services that might be needed. It makes sense that the government now has an interest, and we should have some kind of condition on there saying if we're making a certain level of improvement, then we should also be saying then for X amount of time for the life of that improvement, we should be able to have the people be able to live there. Now, you could still evict people for cause, but you could not just say, okay, we're on a month-to-month lease now, we want you out, even though we've made significant improvements. And so that's what the bill is trying to do, and I do have my testifier with me here today.
Great. Thank you, Representative Fisher. And to your testifiers, and just a friendly reminder about the 2-minute limit. First up, we have Nikki Villavicencio, and on deck is Daryl Paulson. To the testifier.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Nikki Villavicencio. I use she, her, sha pronouns, and I'm an enthusiastic disability justice advocate who happens to just be a Maplewood City Council member, chair of MCD, and ACT Disability Culture and Leadership Specialist. I'm a mom and a partner to another tenacious disability leader here, Daryl Paulson. Today here, I am only to speak on behalf of my family, though. I'm here today to strongly support House File 1854, which protects tenants from unjust displacement when landlords receive public funding for rental unit renovations. I'm testifying not just as an advocate, but as someone who has personally experienced the devastating consequences of eviction following government-funded renovations. Right now, my family and I are facing eviction. My family advocated for years to be able to have home modifications that would allow us to live more independently. We have modifications on the outside consisting of a wheelchair ramp, multiple video cameras, garage door openers, turnaround slab, extra electrical outlets, and more. We have modifications on the inside of our unit consisting of fully accessible bathroom, 2 electronic door openers, full accessible kitchens, and other technology assistant devices. These renovations, funded through taxpayer dollars, were meant to support our ability to live safely in our home. Instead, our landlord is attempting to non-renew our lease and evict us, effectively pushing us out after benefiting from public funds. This is not just an injustice to us, it is a misuse of government assistance and a violation of basic human rights. House File 1854 is critical because it closes the loophole, ensuring that tenants are not displaced after landlords receive public funds for renovations designed to benefit them. Without this protections, landlords can exploit public dollars to increase the value of their rental properties while forcing our tenants, particularly those with disabilities who rely on improvements, to maintain the quality of their life. Additionally, House File 1854 prevents landlords from using unreasonable rent increases as a form of constructive eviction, a tactic often used to force tenants out without a formal non-renewal notice. If inclusion means what the Olmstead decision says it means, landlords should not be allowed to turn around and make housing unaffordable or criminalize these tenants for the very people those funds are meant to help. This is not a theoretical issue. This is happening right now in my case and in the lives of many disabled and low-income tenants across Minnesota. The state should not fund displacement, and House File 1854 ensures that public housing funds are used for their intended purpose, to improve tenant housing stability, not to force tenants out. I urge you to support this bill, and I thank you for your time, and I welcome any questions.
Great, thank you so much. And next up, we have Daryl Paulson.
My name is Daryl Paulson. I'm a white male in a wheelchair, wearing a cap. I use he, him, and his pronouns. I'm here. I can't say anything better than my partner says it. She's the one that got elected. I ran for office multiple times. You might notice the last recent election, I ran against the governor to make him legalize pot. So that is my big claim to fame here. So not to say that that has anything to do with my modifications or any modifications that I'm currently doing, but it definitely, what I would like to say is the modifications that I currently have in the home allows me to come and participate remotely to this body, and that is why this is the first time you've seen me up here during the whole session, because I've been dealing with crappy landlords and bad lawyers. So please pass 1854 to the next committee as we work on it and as we work on protections for people with disabilities and to allow them to remain in their homes of their choice. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. And next up, we have Cecil Smith. And as a reminder, please state your name for the record as well.
Chair, members of the committee, my name is Cecil Smith. I'm President and CEO of the Minnesota Multi-Housing Association. We represent 2,300 members who serve over 600,000 renters who make their home in the 320,000 rental homes provided by our members. I'm here to speak in opposition to House File 1854 as amended, which imposes indefinite lease renewal requirements on housing providers with residents who receive government funding for renter accommodations. This bill fundamentally takes away property owners' rights. It forces housing providers to indefinitely renew leases, even if they need to use the unit differently, sell the property, or rent to someone else. The amendment extends this burden to new owners, meaning they inherit the renters they never agreed to lease to, limiting their ability to manage the property. This is an indefinite arrangement. There's no clear termination date. The bill states that the lease must continue, quote, for as long as the renovation is in a condition that it can be used, but never defines what that means. This could force housing providers into permanent lease obligations with no way to reclaim the unit. Even more concerning, the bill applies retroactively to January 1st, 2024, meaning housing providers who legally non-renewed a lease in the past year could now face lawsuits for violating the law that didn't exist at the time. This opens the door to costly legal battles, unexpected penalties, and raises serious constitutional concerns. Additionally, this bill introduces a form of rent control. If a court finds a rent increase to be unreasonable or disproportionate, it can be treated as a lease non-renewal, but there's no definition of what's unreasonable. This uncertainty discourages housing providers from making necessary rent adjustments to keep up with rising costs. This policy will have unintended consequences. Housing providers may refuse to accept assistance for accommodations if it means permanently losing control over the lease agreements. That ultimately harms the very renters this bill intends to help. Finally, this sets a dangerous precedent. If housing providers can never non-renew a renter because they receive government-funded modifications, what's next? This could lead to similar restrictions on other assistance programs, making it even harder to manage rental properties. For these reasons, I urge the committee to oppose the bill. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your testimony. Next, do any members of the public, are there any other members of the public that wish to testify on this bill? All right, seeing none, we will move to member discussion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Nash.
Thank you, Chair. Representative Fisher, the question of reasonable has come up a couple of times, and I'm just confused because let's just pick an obscure number of $100,000 that gets put into the renovation of one of these units, and I'm just trying to figure out how long does that carry out, and what are the mechanics of making your bill work so that what Mr. Smith just defined as a potential scenario doesn't become reality. And I'm just curious because the bill doesn't state that, and you know, you've been here longer than I have. Being nauseatingly detailed in our bills is probably always a good thing, and I'm just trying to figure out how do we make that mechanically work, because it's not in the bill or in the amendment. Thank you, Chair.
Representative Fisher.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Representative Nash. I would say that in terms of reasonable, it is one of the things that you raise a point on, and part of it comes into so often we're using the disability world, what is reasonable accommodations that we have to make in terms of meeting people's needs. So in terms of this area, I could see that I'm open to doing a little bit more in terms of how we define that. And the reason I say that, and this is where it gets to be a little bit more trickier, but I think there's a solution to it, is that it also comes down to what are the types of improvements you're making. And what I think of now, I'm thinking of in the accounting world, where I've spent a lot of my time in the homeless youth world, is that if you are doing a major improvement that has a life of 15 years, say of a building improvement, taking out and removing cabinets, cupboards, those type of things, and it's determined that's a 15-year life, then that's what we would use as what's considered as reasonable there. Where if you were doing something that had an improvement that was equipment that was going in that had a 5-year life, that's what you would probably use in that type of thing. And that's where it's a little bit trickier, trying to say, okay, what is reasonable is taking a look as it depends what the item is and what are the types of improvements that are being made. And I would say that in terms of the improvements that are being made is when a landlord is saying, go ahead and make the improvements, particularly at this level, when you're taking a look at over $80,000 of improvements that are made on a facility that's $400,000, and then to say, okay, you can then all of a sudden eject the person, and then the next person comes in, and the landlord has benefited from those improvements that have been made there. I can tell you that when this property was sold it was bought in 2017 for $400,000. In June of 2024, it was sold for $594,000 after these improvements were made. So the question is do we have a situation where the landlord is benefiting from government improvements that were made for the clients there that can no longer live there? Now you have to go to another place and you repeat the cycle. That's the concern that is out there. So trying to figure out I'm open to trying to figure out how do we define it a little bit better. I'm open to that, and I'm open to, anyone who's willing to work with me on it. I'm wanting to engage with some people to bring back something for our meeting next week.
Thank you, Chair Fisher. Representative Nash, any follow-up?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So, again, because the devil is always in the details,
Yep.
let's say an improvement is made that might be, I don't know, $75,000. As things are not free when you do renovations, that's one component. But what if during that duration of the depreciation, if you want to call it that, the rents around that facility are also going up naturally?
Right.
If what I'm reading is correct, and I want you to corroborate that, you're saying that if the rents go up around it, with that improvement being in place, the landlord or the housing provider cannot raise the rent? Is that correct? Thank you, Chair.
Representative Fisher.
Thank you, Chair Kozlowski, and thank you, Representative Nash, is that if the rent is going up in terms of reasonableness, if you've got your utilities going up, if utilities are part of it, if you've got the property taxes, we would expect that those kind of increases would occur. And what I'm looking at is that if you make these improvements and the rent went up because the improvements were made, it kind of sounds like, so government is paying to have the improvements made, and because they made the improvements, now the unit is worth more, so as a result, we're going to charge you more rent because we improved the unit to take care of the people, but then at the same time, we turn around and say, well, you can evict the people the next day. You see the situation we're in. We've got a possibility where we can have some things happen that we are not properly served in the long run. That's what I'm trying to get around, is trying to address. It's not easy.
And
Thank
Chair,
you,
just a super
Representative Fisher.
fast
Back
follow-up.
to Representative Nash for brief
Thank you, Chair.
remarks.
And Representative Fisher, we're laying this bill over, but the question is still bagged as to what body is going to interpret reasonableness. And I'm sure somewhere in law, and I'm not a lawyer and I never want to be one, but someone, sorry, Representative Norris, and Representative Albaji. So somebody's getting paid to define what reasonableness is, but that's not specified in the bill. And I don't know, I remember when I debated, I always had a copy of Black's Law Dictionary. I don't remember if Black's defines reasonableness in something that we can wrap our arms around. And I wish it did, or I wish we had it defined in the bill, because reasonableness is something that this whole bill seems to be predicated on as this bill rolls out. So with that, Chair, I will be done. Sorry to impugn lawyer jokes, but I really do think that, once again, Representative Fisher, I'm sympathetic to what you're telling us, but there is a tremendous amount of work that still needs to be done in just definitional aspects of this bill. How does the mechanic aspect of it work if the rents are going up around it? That's not defined, and I would really, really encourage you that if you intend to move this forward, and if it's to be included in an omnibus bill, that you spend the time and tackle those hurdles.
Thank you,
Chair.
Representative Nash and Representative Fisher. This bill, as a reminder, will be laid over so we can continue that work. Next on the list is Representative Ray Rauer.
Thank you, Chair. So I understand there are some concerns, and I'm really appreciative of the points Representative Nash brought up. However, I just want to remind that an eviction for a person with a disability can be catastrophic on their life and their living situation. And a government investment was made for these individuals, and we want to ensure that those investments continue to be able to be used for their intended purposes. So to me, this is really common sense, and hope that those adjustments can be made. But I just want to also point out there can still be evictions based on just cause, so that doesn't take that away. And we really do want to ensure that the government can require accountability when we're providing funds, that we know they're continued to be used for their intended purposes. So because of that, I do urge support for this bill. Thank you.
Great. And next up on our list is Vice Chair Dotseth.
Thank you, Chair, and Representative Fisher. You know, I understand the heart of this bill, and I appreciate what you're doing. However, the question I've got, clarification, are a lot of these modifications retrofit for individual tenants where it may not necessarily fit for every tenant? If a new tenant were to move in, would it, maybe those modifications or improvements may not necessarily match the needs of each tenant that it's been done for?
Sorry, Representative Fisher.
Thank you, Chair Kozlowski and Representative Dotson. It is possible that the improvements that are made may not be what every tenant coming in needs. At the same time, they could be. And so that's one of the things that we have anytime improvements are made into facilities out there, is sometimes they will work for other tenants and sometimes they don't.
Thank you, Representative Fisher. Vice Chair Dotseth, do you have any follow-up?
Just a follow-up question. Additional follow-up on that would be, what would happen in the event that that particular tenant needs additional modifications done to that unit? Would the landlord then be required to do those additional modifications since they already started to receive some funding from the state?
To Representative Fisher.
Thank you, Chair Kozlowski. Representative Dotson, in terms of modifications that might be made going forward, that would rely a lot as to what the funding sources are. And what I mean by that is when people who are disabled are moving in, if they're being provided funding by government sources, whether they're CADI waivers or disability waivers, they have some flexibility as to what those dollars may be. And so you could have a situation where if somebody has a disability waiver and they need some additional improvements made into a unit, and they would negotiate that with the government entity that they are working with, along with the landlord, and say how much can be done in a certain year, because they've got a cap of how much can be spent each year from their disability or other waivers that they have. So if you have eventually need like $100,000 worth of waivers, it could be something that could take 4, 5, or 6 years before they're going to be able to make all those improvements, and those improvements are then paid for by government dollars.
Thank you, Representative Fisher. Vice Chair Dotseth, any additional remarks or comments?
I think I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Next on our list is Representative Hussein.
Chair Kozlowski, you're doing a great job. You're looking good on that gavel. Representative Fisher, thanks for bringing this bill forward. And as you all know, that today is Disability Day at the Capitol, so we have like thousands showed up, and they showed up for reasons. We need to listen to them because they are the expert that are going through all this tough time. One of the bills that we see. Thanks for our City Council member Mabel for coming testifying. This is an issue that it is affecting our community, and our disability are coming forward because we should be working with them. We should not be evictions. So we should not be having more homelessness. And we already have a crisis for housing. So we already have a crisis of fitness. We already have a crisis for in the capital and the state. Twin Cities, you might not have in the greater Minnesota, but we've seen it on the watch. So for those people that disability are getting funding from SSI and getting funding from waivers, landlords should be working with them, should be listening to those people that that's facing as challenges. And I want to, this bill, looking forward to support Fisher for bringing forward. It's not only happening in your district, it is happening throughout the state. It's happening in my district because I have emails that disability are sending to me and saying, speak up for all of them. And I want to speak up right here on the mic, and I'm supporting 100%. I'm with the disability people for bringing this bill forward, and this should be bipartisan. It should not be an individual issue. It's an issue that we should need to fix it, whether we laid it out or whether we continue this bill. We need to fix this matter that's coming forward. Thank you very much, and thanks for bringing this bill forward.
Thank you, Representative Hussein. We are going to move on to Representative Scraba.
Beat ya. Thank you, Chair. And Councilor Villavicencio, did I do a good job? Thank you. You had, you said the word reasonable, and I was imagining what if I was in your shoes, like sitting there and come back to an apartment that's fixed nice, like, hey, all right. And then all of a sudden, the person sells it and makes the profit on, and I'm like, where do I go now? What happened? And depending on the rents around, I mean, Representative Nash did a good job of asking. I had written all this down when you were talking. He asked the same questions, and I'm starting to think more and more. I'm like, trying to define reasonable is, it's going to be hard, but it can be. But maybe we define what's unreasonable and say, if you do this, this is unreasonable. This is not the conduct we're looking for. That might be easier, maybe. I don't know. I couldn't imagine, because it's not like you can just move down the street and get another apartment. That's the problem. It's just how it works in our world. And maybe what everyone's saying here, just let's work together and see what we can do. That's where I'm at. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Representative Scraba. Next on the list, we're going to go to Co-Chair Igo.
Thank you, Chair Kozlowski. Thank you, members. Thank you, Representative Fisher, for bringing the bill today. And I do appreciate the fact that we'll be laying this bill over, because I think this really shows that you have a collective bipartisan issue here that we're trying to work at and fix the issue so we don't have unprecedented side effects. And that is what the legislative process is all about, is so we make sure to think twice and act once, and that's what this conversation is doing today. So thank you, Representative Fisher, for finding this issue and working on it. Looking forward to working together. I think the rest of us in committee look forward to working together as well. Thank you, Chair Kozlowski.
Thank you, Chair Igo. Next, we're going to move on to Chair Howard.
Thank you, members. And I actually have a question for Mr. Smith, if he's available. And you'll have to tell me when he gets up there. I can't quite see from my...
All right, Chair Howard, we'll be your eyes here.
Thank you. And appreciate everyone's willingness for me to be virtual here today and not get you guys all sick.
We appreciate that. Go ahead, Chair Howard. Our testifier is ready.
Thank you, Mr. Smith, and thank you for your testimony. I had a question. I guess first, there are many instances where landlords, even through the sale to a different landlord, accept conditions of rent levels, as an example, based on public resources near the property. Is that not correct?
Testifier Cecil.
Through the chair, that is indeed true.
Back to you, Chair Howard.
Right. And so I think that's what, when I hear the testimony from both Nikki and Daryl, sorry, that, in this property, there was $86,000 of public resources put in that improved and grew the value that then transferred to that next owner. And so that sort of created a beneficial opportunity for that new landowner, or the new tenant, sorry, I'm a little spacey today, but the new landlord. And so I just wanted to get on the record that yes, we do have instances where if public resources are attached to it, those comes with some conditions. And I think that's what we're after here in this bill. I just one more question. We are laying this bill over to do more work on it and hopefully bring it back next week. And I appreciated the discussion, and I think that Representative Fisher, I'm sure, was listening to as well. Mr. Smith, would you be able to share with the bill author, with the committee over the course of the week, specific feedback on the bill or areas and modifications we would like to work together to see if we can move forward on this?
Chair Howard, thank you. To our testifier, Smith.
Through the chair. Representative Chair Howard, we already had a very productive conversation with the author, but to your earlier point, the matter of public funds being provided at a property, those are usually entered into freely on the part of the property owner, often tax credit agreements, TIF agreements, and so forth. In a tenancy situation, because of our federal fair housing laws and state fair housing laws, we cannot discriminate against somebody with a disability. That's against the law, it's unethical, and so when reasonable accommodations are made, those naturally come with the resident, and there is no opportunity for the property owner to influence that outcome. And so in that regard, it is a different scenario because we have set the non-discriminatory rights of the resident above property rights in those circumstances. But this is going to a whole new level. And so we had that conversation with Representative Fisher, and we will continue to have that discussion because we do believe there's a public investment and a public interest here. We also believe there are property rights and there are disability rights that all have to be balanced.
Thank you to the testifier. Chair Howard, are there any additional questions that you have?
I appreciate that. I appreciate your willingness to continue to engage. I would just say we do have a problem here. I'm really supportive of the direction of this legislation, and in the spirit of what really should be what we should be after is sort of a mutually beneficial arrangement where if we're using public resources to make public accommodations, in a sense, that's benefiting the landlord and any future landlord. That's adding value to that property, and it's benefiting the tenants. And so in our current system, though, the landlords are receiving benefit with no protections for people with disabilities, with those public resources getting into it. And so I'm supportive of the bill, and I really appreciate the conversations I've had with Chair Igo and others on the desire to continue to work on this, and look forward to the bill coming back to the committee hopefully soon. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair Howard. Next on the list is Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Can the testifiers stay up to the table, please?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I have a number of, I guess, inquiries regarding this. Is who normally starts the process? In other words, is it the landlord coming to the government entity, or is it the tenants who find somebody, then that is gone to, then goes to the landlord?
To Representative Fisher.
Thank you, Chair Kozlowski, Representative Johnson. It's a combination approach. First of all, the tenants are going to have a waiver that they come in with. And so when they have a waiver, they have to first of all find a willing landlord to work with them, because these are government dollars, and because they're government dollars that are going to end up with rent supports, people don't have to take those rent supports. They can say if you're being funded by government dollars, you can be turned away. So that's the first hurdle that has to be overcome in that process. Then what happens is that once a unit is found and it meets the conditions of the waiver out here, and I'm having to, and if you can give me a second, I'm trying to convert back into my human services world here, trying to make sure I'm following the process through here correctly, is that the government unit that's holding the waivers, they will have case managers who are working then with the tenant and who work with the landlord, who then put together the agreements. And what they usually do is the waivers will usually have a set dollar amount that goes with that tenant. And in that case, the dollar amounts may Pardon?
For 12 months.
Yeah, it's for a 12-month period, because usually leases go for 12 months. And then what happens on that is they have a lump sum of dollars that they have that they can use to assist them, and that dollar is going to vary from each different person based on what their disability is. And then they work with the government unit that they have to figure out, okay, we are going to need these different improvements for the unit that can eventually reduce the amount of aid that's being provided by personal care attendants. So what they will do is they'll prioritize what are the first things that they're going to do, what are the amounts, and they'll work with the landlord, the tenants, and figure out what is the schedule. And in this case, this is something that was a process that took over 6 years as they prioritized what are the different things that we have done. In other words, probably some of the first things that they had was making sure that a ramp was put in so that they could get into the doors. So these are the type of things that are looked at in the process. So it's a complicated process using a number of things. I'm kind of trying to do this at a real high level without having to dive deep into it. But that's overall kind of the view.
Thank you, Representative Fisher. Representative Johnson, any follow-up?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you for that. So they present this to the landlord, and the landlord, property owner, has every right to say, no, they don't want to do it, and especially if this goes forward and they start doing the math in their head, they have every right to say no, correct?
Thank you, Representative Johnson. To Representative Fisher.
Thank you, Chair Kozlowski and Representative Johnson. Yes, the landlord has the right to say no to any of these improvements, and the landlord also has the right to say, because these are government dollars involved, even in terms of the rent supports, we have a right not to be able to say we don't want to rent to you at all. So they already have these other rights that are established out there.
Thank you. Representative Johnson, additional follow-up?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just one more question. Isn't there a concern that if you start putting tails and requirements on the landlord that says you basically lose your rights as a property owner, that people are not going to want to do this and actually it causes more harm in people trying to find places to live?
Thank you, Representative Johnson. To the author.
Thank you, Representative Kozlowski and Representative Johnson. This is a good question out there. Would they lose those opportunities? And I would say that right now there are people who don't do any renting because you have government dollars at all in there. They do have the opportunity to say, no, we're not going to make these improvements, in which case if the tenants really need these improvements, then the tenants will go elsewhere, and then the landlord loses somebody who might rent the place. So there are things that go on both sides of it. I will say that the way the system is set up right now is that we can make these significant improvements, and for whatever reason, if you have a new landlord that comes in, is sold a month later, those people are out, even though they've made the improvements with the thinking that they're going to be there for a while. When you're making significant improvements with government dollars, there are some ties that come in there. And yes, there are some property owners right now who will say we don't want to do those ties, as they do with saying we don't want to take any rent that is paid for by government dollars. They have those rights and they can continue. And that's one of the problems that we have in the disability world, is that people are challenged to find places to live because there are people who say I don't have to take government dollars for payment for rent.
Thank you, Rep. Fisher. And to Representative Johnson, any additional follow-up?
No, thank you, Chair.
Great, thank you. All right, and to Representative Meckland.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know if I really want to put this in the form of a question, but maybe just some thoughts. Earlier you testified that the house was sold in 2017 for $400, and in 2024 it sold for $600, and you're equating that to an increase in value, which I would strongly recommend you look at the market, what happened to pretty much every house at the time, because that was a big factor into that. I guess I'm going to have a question here. What would happen if the landlord was to either die or be foreclosed, and how would this then affect what happens to that property going forward?
Representative Fisher.
Thank you, Chair Kozlowski, Representative Meckland. In terms of a person dying or a person who is going through foreclosure, it would come down to first of all, if this bill passed and what form this bill passed in. Right now, if you're going through foreclosure, as we've seen in downtown St. Paul, when a building goes through foreclosure, everybody ends up out on the streets and homeless. That's what we're seeing right now. That doesn't change that type of situation. In terms of the death and now it's transferred to another property, it would follow the same rules here, is that if you've got a property being transferred with the bill as proposed, as what probably have modifications happening in the future, is that the rights of the tenant would still be, they'd have to be evicted only if there was cause, as long as the life of the improvements were still there. And, we're still working on the language here, so.
Thank you, Representative Fisher. Representative Mecklin, any follow-up?
Yes, Chair. So in that scenario, if somebody was to try to, considering to buy it, they would have to take into account that they are, if they didn't have a desire to be a landlord, if you will, that would have to be factored into that decision if they wanted to make it into a single-family home going forward, is what I'm hearing then. As a person who has done a lot of retrofits for different special needs, mostly veterans, and/or on the backside, removed a lot of these types of things when people either move or pass on. One thing that comes to mind is walk-in tubs. I've taken a lot of them out. They spend a lot of money on them, and only to spend more to get them gone because houses don't sell with that type of thing. So in the event that the tenant left the property for one reason or another, would the homeowner then be reimbursed under, by state or tax dollars to put it back for somebody who didn't need like lowered counters or special stuff? I mean, would there be a funding mechanism for that?
Thank you, Representative Mecklin. Go ahead, Representative Fisher.
Thank you, Chair Kozlowski and Representative Mecklin. In terms of restoring the dollars, I would have to check on that. I don't know the answer right offhand. My suspicion is that probably what would happen is that it would be up to the landlord to take care of that, but I cannot say that definitely. I'd have to take a look at what the agreements are, and there could be different agreements that are written between people as to what ends up happening, particularly when waiver money is being used.
Thank you. Representative Mecklin, anything further?
Thank you. Just a quick comment. These are some of the things that I was just thinking of. I mean, while you're working on this, to take into account so we don't have the unintended consequence of, because it kind of things have to work both ways, and there's a lot of scenarios where if it, I mentioned the foreclosure side of things, that you have to take all these factors into account, and as dynamics change, just something that housing we've learned this year, many of us, very, very complicated. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, with two more bills up on the agenda today, we're going to keep things moving. So back to you, Representative Fisher, for any closing comments.
Thank you, Chair Kozlowski, and thank you, committee, for the robust discussion. I am looking forward to continue work. I do appreciate the input that I'm receiving from people, and we'll continue working with folks along the way. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for the great discussion and look forward to the work ahead. I now move to lay over House File 1854 as amended. All right, members, we're going to, sorry, first time up here. We're going to move back to